That night's events were something I would never anticipate, feeling my son rather than my spouse. It was among the most bizarre yet thrilling evenings of my life. Began as any other, peaceful. In the evening, the house carried after dinner. It's usually quiet. The fading, the whir of the dishwasher in the kitchen, as well as the faint sound of wood. The house went to sleep, and I didn't have any notion that this evening would permanently change how I perceived every aspect of my existence, myself, my family, and my name is Peter. And I believed I had, until lately. I've figured everything out. I'm 43, a diligent individual who constructed a simple but contented existence for myself, my spouse Laura, and I've been married for 18 years. Despite our marriage's ups and downs, I always thought we were strong. Owned 2 children, including my daughter, Clara, who's currently attending college, and my 19-year-old Ethan, the son, who remains at home while Ethan is a community college student who has Laura and I have always been shy kids. Frequently made jokes about how calm he was to Clara's storm due of her location. Ethan wanted to stay because of the fire and intensity. In his chamber, either reading or playing with whatever fresh endeavor had caught his attention. Curiosity over the years, I occasionally concerned that he would experience any diminished in comparison to his sister, or perhaps by Laura and I. But each time I inquired, he'd constantly smile and reassure me that he was all right. However, as he grew older, I observed little changes. He appeared more reclusive, when his typically bashful smiles transformed into brief looks. There were times when I would notice him staring at me. I was holding something that I couldn't place. Something is almost searching. I attributed my questioning to being a teenager. Discomfort, and never gave it any thought. Believed Laura had spent some time away of town. Days at one of her regular jobs, she was employed at an events firm, and frequently went to conventions and planning meetings. It wasn't something unusual. The norm, and I had been accustomed to defending the fort. During her absence, Clara was occupied with her coursework. So Ethan and I were the only people in the house. Ethan's first night following Laura's departure appeared more subdued than normal, so we ate dinner together, and I attempted to create, asking him about school and his most recent endeavor, a 3D model that he had been. He responded courteously after weeks of printing, but he said very little, his gaze darting to mine, and then he was gone again. "You're anxious about something, okay?" I scowled as I asked, "Buddy, you've been kind of..." He smiled slightly at me tonight, despite the silence. However, it didn't make it to his eyes. I assume I didn't push it. I'm simply exhausted. Ethan has consistently been more quiet, and I assumed he would divulge if something was truly annoying him, but I didn't say anything, so I retired to bed, as Laura's side of the bed felt normal as usual, more empty than before, and I discovered missing her company and her warmth body close to mine. Her quiet, whispering voice when she fell asleep. I shut the lights off, closed my eyes, and allowed the house's rhythmic sound to lull. Me to go to sleep at some point, during the faintest sound, woke me up that night. The bedroom door's creak is opening. Squinting into my heart's darkness, without missing a beat, the room fell silent. Aside from the noise of my own, the slight rustling of fabric and breathing, I muttered as someone approached Laura. My first voice was heavy with slumber. Believed that she had arrived home early. Perhaps to my surprise, the figure didn't reply. The mattress dipped instead. A little as the individual sat on my sleep-deprived mind, attempted to put together what was going on, but before I could completely awaken, I experienced it was a kind hand on my leg. Laura's hand, making such a familiar move. Her method of anchoring me is by my arm or leg. Her method of expressing her presence, but the hand felt strange, and it persisted. The touch is too hesitant, as if the person was attempting to imitate her. Motions, but I wasn't entirely sure how. I opened my eyes and adjusted my vision to the dim illumination of the moon. What I saw was flooding through the slats. Stopped my heart from sitting next to me. I mentioned it was Ethan, not Laura. I sounded confused and alarmed. The fact that he didn't move his hand, still lightly resting on my arm, although my face was partially obscured, I could observe the uneasiness in his lips and gaze, parted as like he had something to say, but nothing was said. Is everything all right? I sat up and inquired, and now my pulse was racing, and I could sense his heat. Hand through my shirt's material. Why are you your father? He cut off. Not much more than a whisper. I didn't mean I only scowled in uncertainty to wake you. Expanding. Then why are you growing? Paused, letting his hand fall away as he... I'm not sure he looked down at the floor, whispered, I just wanted to make... I blinked at him to make sure you were all right. Uncertain of what to say, he was observing me with such uncertainty and vulnerability. Titan. I'm okay. I made my chest, Ethan. I gently, but you ought to be in bed. For a brief moment, it is late, and he did not move. Then he slowly raised his shoulders. Slumped. I apologize, but I'll go. As he turned to leave me wanting something. I had no idea what it was that stopped him. Perhaps his dejected appearance, or the odd sense of shame that is creeping in my gut. But I allowed him to go while observing him vanish through the door as I reclined. Down, gazing up at the ceiling, my thoughts, what had it been about? Racer, and why did he enter my room in that manner? Did that cause me to feel so uneasy? But the most absurd aspect was that it continued. Oh no, the tale most certainly didn't end here, not yet. I woke up the following morning. I had hardly slept, and woke up earlier than usual. My thoughts following Ethan's unannounced visit, impossible to relax. Each time I shut my eyes, I relived the scene. As hesitantly, he sat on the bed. The manner in which his hand hovered above me as though he wasn't certain whether he ought to be. It was unnerving there, but not in the... I shook the ideas away as I had anticipated. By the time I finished getting dressed for the day, headed downstairs, and Ethan was there already, scrolling and drinking coffee at the table. He looked up on his phone when I walked with an understandable expression, but he was standing with a stiff posture. Something wasn't there in the morning. Stated, attempting to seem light. Your yes, he said in a hushed voice. Up early. Struggled to fall asleep and paused for a pause, prior to making myself a cup of drinking coffee and taking a seat across from him. Regarding last night, I apologized to Ethan. Cut off his speech more abruptly than I didn't intend to frighten you. Or anything that I should not have entered your room is fine, I said hastily. I was only concerned that you appeared unhappy. Shrugged, returning his attention to his phone. Don't worry about it. But I was unable to ignore it. The way he had regarded me as he had stroked my arm was too purposeful and significant. To somehow be dismissed as inconsequential, I couldn't quite pinpoint it. But it had excited me. It, and the most bizarre thing, was that I felt from his end as well. I wanted to ask him further questions to determine what was running through his mind. Yet something in his non-verbal cues told me to leave it. I'm alone for the time being. So I did the remainder of the day go by. Ethan stayed in his room without incident for the majority of it, and I kept myself busy with tasks and errands in an attempt to get rid of the persistent uneasiness by nightfall. When I turned around, I was worn out and prepared. In an attempt to avoid falling into bed, I reflect on the night before as I crawled beneath the blankets. Yet my thoughts continued to ponder what had motivated Ethan entering my room in that manner. Was he experiencing something that he wasn't describing something to me? Or was there something? Another thing I didn't want to acknowledge was must have fallen asleep at some time. Because I realized that the next thing I was the sound of the door waking me up. My heart leaped as it creaked open once more. Squinting into the darkness, I sat up. I whispered, "Laura," even though I knew it. The figure at the doorway wasn't her. Paused prior to entering, and in the moonlight, Ethan's familiar. My heart rate increased due to a combination of confusion as well as another issue I was unable to name, as though the circumstances were the same. Played once again in my head. I believed maybe I was dreaming, Ethan, when I spoke, colored with fury and worry. "Why are you back here, and what's going on?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he went to the bed and took a seat on the edge, just like the previous evening, was dressed in a baggy t-shirt and sweatpants. His sleek, untidy hair and his stance revealed a vulnerability that pulled at a deep part of me. "I apologize," he whispered quietly, his eyes locked on the ground. "I realize this is strange, but I asked since I didn't want to be alone." Voice softer now, "Ethan, what's happening?" He hesitated before saying, "You can talk to me?" Fingers tinkering with his hem shirt. "I'm not sure," he acknowledged. "It's simply, Clara is not here. Mum is gone, and the house seems so deserted. So I suppose I just wanted to have a sense of intimacy with someone's remarks. Struck me more strongly than I anticipated that I would have been so self-centered. Feeling so alone without Laura that I hadn't thought about how it may be impacting Ethan, who had never spoken and taciturn, but perhaps that was his style, of managing the same emotions that I was having trouble. "But it's okay," I said, a hand on his shoulder, letting him know he's not alone. "I'm here, Ethan." He glanced up at me. His gaze swept across mine, and for a brief between us, the air felt electrified with I couldn't explain it, so I offered his smiled and gave his shoulder a comforting squeeze. "Come on, I'm trying to reduce the stress." Remarked, "If it helps, you can pat the bed. Spend some time here, but you must pledge to get a decent night's sleep." Didn't understand why I said that, as in, I somehow thought that I also didn't desire to sleep once more as well. He nodded, a tiny smile peeking out from under his anxious look. "Okay, thanks." "Dad?" Ethan reclined on the opposite side of the keeping a reasonable distance from the bed. I shut out the lights and shut my eyes, attempting to disregard the odd combination with feelings rushing through me. The room was quiet, aside from the sound of our breathing, and his presence was palpable. Next to me, like a steady, warm pulse, I dozed off at one point, but it was a sleeping restlessly. I awoke once more, in that my senses are on high in the middle of the night, alert, although I wasn't certain what had roused me initially. But then I sensed a light. Ethan tentatively touched my arm. I spoke in a drowsy murmur, but he didn't respond, but his hand continued to touch. It felt so soft against my flesh. Gentle, purposeful motion, that my mind shouted in my throat that I should have spoken something to halt this earlier. My body wouldn't allow it to go any farther. He muttered in a barely audible voice, "To move, Dad." Audible? I'm sorry, I simply looked at him as I turned my head. His face, my heart thumping in my chest, stood just inches away from me. His eyes, full with a mixture of want and terror that I couldn't disregard. Before I spoke, he leaned in and brushed anything against his lips, in a motion against my cheek, so it was so soft and short that I questioned my startled friend. "What are you doing?" Voice shaking, but not out of fear. He acknowledged his voice, but I'm not sure. I simply don't know the room. Breaking was tense, and the quiet extending like a taut wire between us. I desired to make a statement to break the spell, but my thoughts were frozen. Moving too quickly to comprehend, Ethan pulled his face back a little. I apologize, a mixture of desperation and shame. His voice cracked in a whisper. I should have gone before doing that. I could reply, but he had vanished into the shadows and abandoning me under the crippling burden of what had simply occurred. I believe he was unaware of it. That didn't bother me. In fact, I quite enjoyed it when he went, and I now felt sorry, for I was certain that I wanted more of it. Never encountered this, but as of right now, I decided to attempt ignoring it, at least, and tomorrow I'd like to invite him to sleep with me. Occasionally, perhaps talk about it, so I did the next day. I was unable to concentrate on whatever that kept coming to mind. Returning to Ethan, his tentative touch, his apologized in a whisper, the way his lips had just touched my cheek. It was too far too peculiar, but it was unable to remove Ethan from my thoughts. He kept away from me all morning, staying in his. The door of the room was closed, and I reassured myself to have the guts to knock. He most likely needed time to think. Whatever had occurred, and to be honest, did I. But the longer the hours passed, the household tension reached an intolerable level. By mid-afternoon, I was unable to handle it. I was now standing outside. My hand hovered a few inches above his door. I thought for a moment from the wood leaving, but I knocked gently first. I called Ethan while attempting to speak clearly. "Stable, may we speak?" It was a lengthy pause before his footsteps could be heard. Getting closer, he opened the door, appeared different from his typical guarded. Something took the place of the expression, softer, nearly defenseless, and it made my... He stepped softly and murmured, "Hey, chest ache." I stepped into his, and he moved aside to let me enter. Taking a moment to look around the room was as tidy and well-organized as he was, but there was a lingering sense of hesitancy. He motioned me to take a seat over the area, in bed, and I complied, with my anxieties were begging me to get out. I said, "Just wanted to check in." He winced when he thought about yesterday night. "I apologize." His shoulders are hunching a little, added hastily, "I realize it was strange. I shouldn't have interrupted Ethan." Holding up a hand, "I'm not angry. It's all right. I really must comprehend what is happening. And I'd like to share something with you." His hands were fluttering in his lap as he hesitated. "I'm not sure, but I suppose," he eventually admitted. "Sometimes I simply feel so alone, and it's like I don't know when Mom is gone. Like even with you, the place feels empty." His remarks struck me more forcefully than I had always attempted to be a good father, but after hearing him say that, he felt isolated. "Ethan, I'm sorry if I offended you." I whispered softly, "You feel like you're not alone, okay? I'm always here for you." He nodded, but he continued to stare at. "I am aware that the flaw isn't the leaning. What do you mean by that? He leaned forward a little and inhaled deeply. It's difficult to see his hands squeezing into fists. He spoke in a barely audible voice to clarify. It seems like I want to be above a whisper. Near you, but not as close as I am expected to, and I'm at a loss on what to do. His comments lingered in the air after that. I felt my gut, and it was raw and heavy. Twist into knots that I was not of how to a part of me wanted to brush it off in response. Left to inform him that it was only a phase, but an additional section that I didn't want to admit to feeling a mysterious attraction, Ethan, I started gently towards him. Believe you're perplexed. It's common to— I don't feel confused, he stated confidently. He cut me off, then his eyes met mine, brimming with an understated ferocity that made I know how I feel, and it makes my heart skip a beat. And I am aware that it is abnormal, but I am unable to. I tried to react, but I couldn't help myself. We sat because the words wouldn't come. There, silently, the burden of his confession weighing us down like I wanted to console him with physical force, to reassure him that it would be all right. But I was unaware that this was uncharted. I was absolutely lost in territory. I still hadn't expressed my feelings to him, but what remained would transform the narrative all over the place that evening. I attempted to pretend that everything was normal. We ate dinner together and discussed routine tasks like work and school. But there was an implicit conflict between us that neither of us discussed. I was unable to feel his gaze on me at all times. Away, causing my skin to prickle with a mixture of uneasiness and another thing. I intended to ask him to tell me his name, but join me this evening. But when I attempted to simply was unable to open my mouth. When I eventually went to sleep, I was unable to dispel the impression that the evening wasn't. I was lying in the dark, gazing at the ceiling while my mind raced over Ethan's. His voice played words in my head, loaded with a great deal of vulnerability and desire that made me gasp for air, and so I got out of bed and went directly to he was still awake in Ethan's room, murmured he initially didn't respond. But Ethan, I was certain he had heard me. Would you be interested in joining me tonight? Yes, son, I would love to, responded Dad. Without hesitation, he ascended, directly onto my bed, causing his weight. He sat with the mattress dipping a little. His hands were briefly resting on his knees. Then he extended his hand and put a hand on my arm as I walked in. The bed too, Dad, he added quietly. Shaky voice. Please thrill me like a mom. I screamed in my head as I glanced at him. I should stop now and say something that would stop whatever was going on, but I was unable to. The expression in his eyes, the unadulterated feeling in his voice, made me totally helpless. Ethan, this isn't me, started, but he interrupted me, didn't he? His hand tightened on my arm in a whisper. I swallowed hard, so please let me stay. My voice is dry, yet I said at last, my unsteady voice, but we must discuss. He gave a slight nod this morning, a smile tugging at his lip corners. As he lay down, he said, Thank you. Beside me, I experienced an odd combination of feelings whirling within me. Remorse, fear, and something that is perilously near. I said in a scarcely audible voice to Hope, Ethan. I know it's a whisper, but we can't false, he said, his voice quivering. I can't continue to pretend, though. Therefore, I don't care. I can't continue to withhold my feelings from you, Dad. I didn't mean to shake my head. You are perplexed. This isn't genuine, he said firmly, his eyes locking. Real. Onto mine, I'm more certain than ever of his remarks struck me in every aspect of my life. like a tidal surge that left me gasping for air and confused. I wanted to dispute, inform him that he was wrong, but the conviction in his voice, the unadulterated truth in his eyes, made it hard to ignore that he genuinely thought he was stating that I'm not sure how to handle this. I acknowledged that my voice was cracking beneath the weight. Right now, I'm not sure how to. You don't need to fix anything. Just fix this, he remarked, extending his hand to take mine. The warm, grounding touch despite my best judgment, my pulse quickened. I pulled my hand. Please let me in. Away, my chest constricted with a combination of Ethan. This isn't about guilt and dread. What I desire is centered on what's morally correct, and this isn't correct. He glanced down I recognize your shoulders dropping into feet. Believe that he spoke softly, but you are aware that you don't truly believe it. His words lingered in the air entirely. Pang felt weighty and unyielding. Of something I was unable to identify, was it shame or guilt? Or was it the horrifying insight that a piece of me wanted to avoid pushing him away while after a little period of silence, agitation struck. I met his gaze directly, and I believe he became aware of it as well. Suddenly, the entire tension was transformed into something so apart from what the topic of discussion was, yet from the way he moved swiftly. So I was certain that having experienced this for the past several days later, the kiss had prompted something I couldn't ignore about myself. I said, kiss. After an excessively long quiet, I heard Ethan say something that astonished me again. Just do it, Ethan. As you said earlier, act as though you would do what Mum would do. I stopped holding back all of a sudden. Abruptly, something changed within me, and Ethan, no longer withheld anything, leaned down to give me another kiss. Time difference is better and more severe when he kissed me and grabbed me at Laura's locations. Would you have wanted to go from kissing to more? And I was unable to stop it as it got worse. I'm not going to go because I didn't want to. In depth, but I can assure you that it was incredibly sensitive, nervous, and from I believe it to be a little hurtful. But I'm not sure. Why? But he had assumed Laura's role. Quite literally, I could tell from how he brought up my name after I had completed. He lay there, and neither of us. Are you aware of what just transpired? All right, son, I replied. Yes, Dad. Don't worry. About me, allow me to take a quick trip to the loo. Pause, and let's simply go to bed. That is the final detail I can clearly recall. I believe I fell asleep when he was in the bathroom. When I woke up in the morning, early reflection about the previous event, I was halfway through my coffee at night. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, and I knew it without having to look back. The presence of Ethan seemed to fill the room before uttering a single word. Good morning, he murmured quietly. I turned to face him, hesitantly, providing a little grin and morning coffee on the... He nodded at the counter and moved to pour. For a brief period, we stood in his cup. Silence the obvious tension between us. Ethan, I eventually couldn't stand it any longer. I started to put down my mug. We must... He tensed his shoulders as he spoke. He looked at me, talking about last night. His voice was only a little bit higher than a whisper about all I mentioned I needed. To comprehend what's happening with you, he paused. What's going on with us? I'm not sure, but my eyes are lowering to the ground. He acknowledged that I simply feel as like I've been keeping this to myself for a long time, and I could no longer. I know it's incorrect, Dad. I'm aware of that, yet I can't control my emotions. His remarks were like a kick to the stomach. I wanted to correct him on that. Although he didn't truly feel this way, I could tell by the gleam in his eyes that this wasn't a passing idea or adolescent. It was more complicated than that. I was more frightened by something than I carefully said. I cared to admit, Ethan, must you realize that this is what you sense, that it's difficult, and that not something that we can simply do? Nodded, his face hurting. I know, he stated softly, yet it doesn't go away. The room became quiet once more, his confession's weight hanging between. I intended to comfort us like a dense fog, to reassure him that everything would be all right. However, I was unaware of how this was uncharted. I felt like I was wandering across territory, a tight RPP that is just one mistake away from. It was awkward to fall for the remainder of the day. Ethan, at the very least, remained in his most of it in space, and I made an effort too. I divert myself by doing errands and doing chores. But I kept thinking about him. Each time I reflected on how he gazed at me with such raw vulnerability that I felt, by nighttime, my chest had tightened. I sat in the living room and rolled around. Ethan is drinking whiskey in his room. He glanced at what appeared in the doorway. With hesitation, he pushed his hands into his pockets. Yet there was a resolve in. Is it possible that his eyes made my heart race? He said, "Sit," in a hushed voice, and I nodded. Not knowing how to say no to him, he approached and took a seat on the couch. Next to me, leaving a cautious quantity of "I apologize for the distance between us," he remarked, following an extended period of stillness to make things strange. "I simply didn't mean to know how to deal with it. I am aware that I stated my quiet voice. It's all right. We'll work this out." He glanced at me before his eyes filled with such sensitivity that it created. He inquired, "Do you hate me?" While I had a chest ash, his voice was hardly audible, so I couldn't hear it. Stated right away, putting a hand on his Ethan, "I could never dislike you." He winced a little when he realized you were my son. The term, but instead of pulling away, when I touched his shoulders, he leaned in. "For the first time in days, I'm unwinding. Simply want to be near you," he stated, voice shaking. "I don't give a damn how I just." His words broke something, and "I need you" inside of me, and I embraced him, keeping him close while he buried his muttered face in my shoulder. "I'm here." For a minute, it felt like I would always be here, like though everything might be all right, and we might be able to go over this and restore our connection. But as he retreated and raised his gaze to meet mine, I sensed that it was glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you for the return of the traditional tension." He spoke gently, his voice heavy with feeling for sticking with me. I nodded. He stood, my throat too constricted to speak. I stretched out and took his hand to depart. Ethan on his hand, stopping him in his tracks, I said, scarcely raising my voice above a whisper. He grinned. "We'll work this out together." A slight hesitant smile that made a pang with warmth in my chest. "I am aware that we will," he said, and as he left, I couldn't get rid of the sensation that the narrative was not at all over the lines that we had drawn, were already starting to become hazy. And yet I had no idea what the future held. Held the belief that nothing would never be the same again.